Now, there's been an echo of calls for the blanket rule on social distancing measures to be dumped and for the government to focus on quarantining vulnerable people. Instead, IPA research fellow Mr Begg believes states are misusing public health emergency powers as well. He says the ban on low-risk activities should be lifted. For more, IPA research fellow Mr Beggs joins me now. Morgan, look, we've just heard of some of the stresses that are occurring because of this pandemic, this coronavirus crisis that's engulfing the world. And what you guys have done, you've obviously done some research which shows that not only are people being stressed, but people are looking forward very much to the day when the Prime Minister and the state and territory leaders say, OK, we are going to slowly but surely stage some sort of lifting of these restrictions.
Yeah, that's right. In order to have, Australians have been very accommodating to the social distancing restrictions which have been imposed on them. But in order to have hope and optimism about the future, we really need to have an idea of what the economy and what society is going to look like on the other side of this. But unfortunately, the governments, the National Cabinet has said that, any decisions about relaxing the restrictions are at least another 4 weeks away, subject to certain conditions being met. It's very dispiriting, very discouraging.
Morgan, what do you think the path forward will be? Do you think that they will look at things like, and I know in Victoria, I heard Sam Newman earlier today on radio having an absolute spray at Dan Andrews about the ban on golf, which does seem ridiculous considering that in New South Wales and Queensland there's no dramas with playing golf. There are strict protocols in place. You can't go in buggies. You've got to walk and do all those sorts of things. They take your temperature, all that sort of stuff. What do you think will be the process here? Do you think cafes and restaurants will be the first to be lifted?
Oh, I think the first step is just to remove the restrictions which don't comply with the social distancing principles which we've established as being necessary for this public health response. So those public health, the distancing principles, which are to keep 1.5 metres away from all other people, there are numerous activities and activities which are currently restricted or completely prohibited, which can otherwise be undertaken while maintaining those distancing principles. So there is plenty of scope for reform in the immediate term to begin this wind-back process.
Morgan, a lot of our viewers are from regional areas, from the bush, and they'd be sitting at home tonight thinking, OK, well, look, we have no evidence of coronavirus within our town or our particular regional outpost, and yet we can't go to the club, we can't go to the pub, we can't go to the tab. In Victoria, we can't go and play golf. Do you think it'll be some of those more isolated towns and cities that will be allowed to stage these particular lockdown restrictions lifting first? Do you think they'll be the first cabs off the rank?
Well, that may be the case. I mean, the social distancing requirements are tailored probably more towards higher density areas, such as urban environments. If the government, if state governments, for instance, wanted to trial some easing of restrictions, they could do it in those lower density areas, such as rural areas. I think that is definitely a direction that should be explored.
And of course, the $64 million question is, when will we get footy back? Now, we know the NRL is pushing ahead with a May 28 date. And the way the stars are aligning, if in a month's time the curve continues to flatten and there are a lifting of some restrictions, that's that time frame looks achievable. But what about the AFL? I'm sure Gil McLaughlin has a plan. What are you hearing down there?
I think, as I said before, Australians have been very accommodating to the restrictions so far. But in states like Victoria or South Australia or WA, any continuing restrictions on Aussie rules football it cannot go on much longer. I'm hearing a lot of dissatisfaction about that one.
Well, I'm sure you are. And just before I go, Morgan, I'm interested in the IPA's stance on this crisis that we've seen come out of obviously China, and we know that Donald Trump has withdrawn WHO funding from the United States' perspective. There's pressure on the Morrison government to entertain that prospect as well, and certainly we do know that they are taking this incredibly seriously. Can you believe that the Chinese are even considering reopening wet markets where there's ample evidence that this particular pandemic emanated from?
It seems extraordinary to me. I think a lot of the news that comes out of China often amuses me. I can't put much logic to it, much of what happens there, and certainly not much trust.
Yeah, without question. Morgan Begg from the IPA, thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.